Hi everyone, it's Rob Watson, the module leader for TECH1002. Happy New Year. Hope you had a great Christmas break and that you got lots of reading done and lots of sleeping done and not too much eating and all that kind of stuff. This is the summary of the first lecture of the new term, which is the 12th lecture overall. So this is actually the halfway mark in terms of lectures. What I'm going to do this week is I'm going to give a bit of a recap over some of the issues and topics that we've covered and think about some of the challenges and the kind of issues that we are present at the moment in lots of debates about social media and what the kind of social challenges are that some social challenges, there are many social challenges that we may need to take account of in the way that we work, in the way that we understand and think about social media. So what I want to do is kind of go back over some of the topics that we've covered. I want to introduce some issues of social concern, which ties in with some of the planning that you've been doing in the workshop sessions. And then also to look at some of the ways that we'll work and how we need to what kind of mindset we need to adopt in order to be able to prepare ourselves for a world which is faced with all of these significant social challenges and issues, so that we don't come to it, if you like, naively, but what we can do is we can offer a constructive and a positive contribution to these debates. So in the first half of the module, in the lectures, what we covered was really the idea that we live in a mediated society, that we live in a world which is structured and organised through the process of mediation, and that the process of mediation takes many forms, and the process of mediation of kind of communication and language and understanding one another is something that we negotiate, but we use different forms of technology in order to enact that sense of negotiation. So what we can see is as times change and as periods of history move on from one period to another, and the technology that underpins those cultures, they change as well. They help to change and shape the mediation process itself. So remember, we started off by talking about the initial idea from Marshall McLuhan that the media is the message, and that's really important for us because it gives us the sense that as we trace different types of media and different patterns of media and how media organises us and helps us to organise in different ways, then we can think about the world in different ways. And we're going to go into this in a bit more detail when we look at it coming up in the next couple of weeks. We'll look at the affordances and constraints model, and we've got some more specific examples of how changes in media technology have driven innovation and social change as well. So we started off by identifying that mediation is a social process, and that it's important that we look at the techniques and the tools and the systems that we use in terms of mediation, but also that this is a very kind of creative and expressive set of cultural practices and tools, and that we share our opinions and views with one another through the media. So this is a social process which is grounded in our social experience, and it's kind of, if you like, a set of conversations, and what we need is to identify a set of tools, thinking tools that will help us with those conversations. So one of the things we looked at later on in the lectures before Christmas was the idea of kind of identity, and the kind of idea of a kind of sense of playfulness with our identity, and that fashion and art and music and things are all tied up into this idea of how we create and invent ourselves, and that the language changes and shifts as we go along as well. So almost what you can say now is that the mediators are the message. So the people who use and create the media, that's what we want to focus on. That's our topics of discussion, if you like. The next stage that I want to talk about in the lecture is the idea of what's called the Great Disruption, which is a term which represents by an ecological theorist called Paul Gilding, who talked about the idea that there's a lot of challenges that need to be faced up for in the future, which are associated with things like climate change, pollution, carbon emissions, the urbanization, artificial intelligence, the kind of growing in social inequalities, the globalization, and there's an awful lot of these issues and topics which are going to be coming forward in the next, now, presently. We see it in our politics now. Kind of, I think Trump and Brexit is a kind of an emblematic response to some of these issues. But how will we deal with them in the future? And can we come up with any kind of creative solutions without just being, if you like, fatalistic about the kind of way that we organise our communities and the way that we organise and use our media and the kind of media products that we employ and that we use and the kind of working practices that we engage in that help us to support and produce and embed a more collaborative and more social response to some of these issues. So there's a kind of whole set of social problems and social issues that we really need to start thinking about, and what would be the positive contribution that social media makes in kind of responding to these problems. How can we use social media for the benefit and the greater good of a larger number of people, rather than just serving, if you like, a small range of sectional interests? So we've got some examples to look at. We've got kind of issues about diversity and equal opportunities and equal access to resources within media. We've got the way that social media has enabled women in the last 12 months to start to push back against some of the inherent sexism within things like the film industry and the TV industry. We've got a sense that our neighbourhoodness, our sense of community, our local sense of community is somehow under pressure. And we've also got a kind of sense that the levels of social mobility that we achieve as a community and as a nation are being under pressure, and in some ways are going into reverse, and people's expectations about these. It comes up in things like kind of the range of people who are recruited to senior organisations like the BBC or the judiciary, and also kind of people, the role of people in education, and the number of people, particularly women, who rise into top senior management posts is actually still quite narrow, and what we can kind of do about these issues. Now, they're kind of general social issues which are important, and I suppose what we want to focus our attention on is what role does social media play in bringing about change and bringing about a different kind of response to these issues. So we'll look at the way that kind of smartphones and social media applications, so Tinder and Facebook, have really kind of shaped or are shaping, and there's a bit of something which we might call a backlash effect to some of these forms of social media. Now, there's a kind of sense of what's the word I'm looking for? Surveillance, a sense of control, a sense of kind of intolerance, a kind of sense of negativity that gets built into some of our responses with social media. And what we want to be thinking about is how we can, it can go either way. Social media can be both a negative experience or a positive experience. How do we ensure that it sticks mainly to being a positive experience, and people feel as if they're in control of their own use of social media, rather than something which is that they just do as a kind of formulaic response without any thinking, but something which they're actually kind of creatively involved as an independent individual as well. So we'll look at some examples about how Facebook is being and social media generally is being challenged, and that there are some hard questions to be asked about what is good and what is bad in social media. And actually what the role is of the kind of tech giants, Google, Twitter, Facebook, these kind of things. Do we need to rein them in is a good question. So this brings me to the point where before Christmas I circulated a report which had come out from BT about the kind of technology skills. And while this report doesn't go into a massive amount of detail, it fits really well with the approach that we take in this module towards skills, literacies, technology, ideas, creativity. And we'll look at this as a kind of way of saying, well, what are the kind of future skills that people are going to need for those jobs that haven't been invented yet? It's highly likely that the jobs that you will be going into are, the majority of you, they're not around yet. The technology and tools that you'll be using in those jobs may not be around yet. They're just about to be introduced. So how do we prepare ourselves for this? How do we ensure that we have the right balance of skills, and that it's a framework, if you like, that can allow us to continue to learn for our ongoing life, our working life, without having to have somebody to instruct us and tell us what it is to do? How do we promote thinking for ourselves and thinking independently and thinking creatively and problem solving? So they're the kind of questions we want to raise. So we're looking at the idea of what kind of knowledge about technology, what know-how do we need in order to be able to deal with a world that is very rapidly going beyond the traditional forms of media. So we're going beyond. We live in a age which is past, but beyond broadcasts as the dominant form of social interaction through media. We now live in an age in which a multiplicity of platforms are constantly becoming available, and that we have to somehow have thinking skills to be able to make value judgments about those, the use and the what we can expect from them, and what kind of social, remember the name of the module, social media innovation. What does that social element mean? We can define media in a very kind of simple way, I think, and we've established that already. But what do we mean about the social part of this? And that's a crucial element for what we want to look at as we go forward. So we'll talk a little bit about how the thinking skills that we need, and the kind of debate and discussion, and the kind of process, and how we'll use the blogs and wikis and your next assignment and those kind of things. So this is really a kind of, it's an overview lecture. The notes will be available on the DMU Commons wiki as normal. Just go to wiki.our.dmu.ac.uk and look for the TECH1002 section, and you'll find the notes in the lecture section there. So see you at the lecture. Sorry, I've gone on a lot. That's 12 minutes. That's very long. But I'll see you at the lecture on Tuesday afternoon.